Hey everybody, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and I got to sit in a room with some super smart professor types at different points going to college, and at times I would just marvel at how they would make an hour and 20 minutes of conversation fly by, just drawing great stuff out of people, and it was like the class just happened, and like no one did anything, and it looked so easy, and then I would try to do that in conversations with my friends, and it would not go very well. And so I was picking one of these guys' brains one time. And I was like, what do you do? How do you do that? What's the touch? What am I missing? What are you doing behind the scenes? And this guy said, and this is a horrible paraphrase because this is years ago, he said, 1 or 2 good questions will get it done. If you put your time into thinking about a great question, the pregnant question, the obvious question, then whoever takes the baton and runs with it at that point, it's going to go somewhere interesting, because if the question is well targeted, then the conversation has a great chance of thriving. And likewise, in Matthew chapter 24, the thing that is the precipitating event that kicks off all of this great, grand fifth of the 5 big speeches around which the book of Matthew is structured, that being the Olivet Discourse, the precipitating event is just a couple of really good questions from some people who haven't always asked the best questions, from some people who haven't always been the most perceptive about what's going on, that being the disciples. They've whiffed a ton throughout the book of Matthew, and I don't think for a second that we should get in our fancy seat and make fun of them for how dumb they are and how smart we are. I mean, they're doing it without the benefit of a New Testament or a church or being raised around Christianity or knowing anyone who's raised around Christianity. And they got the pressure of having like God right there all the time. It's not an easy thing that they're doing. And so it makes sense that they're going to have some clunkers about like, oh, maybe we should murder people with fire from heaven, or oh, maybe we should build some little huts or something since God's here and Moses and stuff. And so it doesn't always go great, but you're seeing the maturation process of the disciples when you get to the beginning of Matthew chapter 24, because it seems like they've accepted what Jesus is saying about he's going to die, he's going to be raised back to life. They're accepting what Jesus first started to explain to them in Matthew chapter 10 about the role that they're going to need to play moving forward in all of this. And they're accepting the reality that even though it's unthinkable, that the temple, apparently there's some kind of reckoning coming that involves maybe the literal destruction of the temple. And they got to do this solo. And so the obvious question would be like, when's that going to happen? And what should we be looking for to know that the time is now? And in fact, that's pretty much exactly what they ask. And tacitly, Jesus affirms that it's a great question because he goes on to answer their 2-part question in 2 parts. And all of it goes like this. Matthew 24, verse 3. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. Now, they're on the Mount of Olives. You'll recall that they were over at the temple. There's a little drop in elevation and gain in elevation through this little valley that they would have passed through. And on that walk, the disciples, as we talked about yesterday, are processing the grandeur of the temple and what Jesus is saying about the fate of the temple and where they fit into all of that. This is the awkward station wagon ride we were talking about. And so they're trying to come to grips with the idea that this building is going to be taken apart and all that that's going to mean politically and in terms of violence. Like nobody's going down without a fight. If that's going to happen, this thing's going to be ugly. And they get to the other side, maybe the day's winding down and now they're looking back on this thing that they've been talking about. I picture it being a scene that's framed like the end screen of every single 8-bit video game you ever beat, ever, as a kid. If you know what I'm talking about, great. If not, you're going to be just fine. And there they sit, and now they've mustered the courage to ask this question. Tell us, they said, when will this happen, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Verse 4, Jesus answered, watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, claiming, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. We got to be super careful at this point not to divorce Jesus' answer from the question that he's responding to, but we also need to note the structural approach Jesus is taking to answering the question. Jesus is saying, well, watch out for this thing. This thing's going to happen. You're going to hear these rumors. And, that's not really a specific time. It sounds like what he's speaking to is the signs. So Jesus is taking part 2 of their question and answering part 2 first. Again, specifically, part 2 of their question was, what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Well, apparently one of the signs is that a bunch of people are going to impersonate him. They're going to try to ride the coattails of the chosen one motif and claim, I'm him. No, I'm him. I'm the one. Come and follow me. I got a plan for where things need to go and what we need to be doing next. I'm going to need your sword and I'm going to need your blood and let's get after it. And Jesus' clear instruction is that don't be taken in by the stupid fake stuff, because many are going to come and say the words, I am the Christ. But apparently just somebody saying, I am the Christ is not enough for you to be like, oh, well, that sounds Christian. That sounds like something that the Christ would say. Why would somebody say that if they weren't the Christ? So we should probably ascribe to this guy. What was your name again? Ted, all of the loyalty that we used to ascribe to Jesus when he was here in person. So this is very, very exciting times. And it's funny because it seems so ridiculous and absurd when I put it like that. But history has told us that maybe in people's eagerness to feel special, or like they are alive at an important moment in history, or like their lives now have meaning, or their death could have meaning, or maybe their confused conspiracy theories just got the best of them, or maybe just in their eagerness to have an opportunity to really viscerally and physically follow Jesus in the flesh, people keep falling for this one, even though Jesus called it out right from the beginning. It was like, hey, this is going to happen. Don't fall for it. Now, we've talked a lot about the basic ways to know the difference between somebody who says that they're the Christ or they're coming in the name of the Lord, and whether or not they're telling the truth or falsehood. And I think one of the best ways to figure that out is the threefold test for orthodoxy and rightness that we get in 1 John, and that really does come up throughout the Gospel of John as well. And those three basic tests to subject anything to that claims to be from God, or even specifically God in the flesh, are, is this theologically in keeping with who Jesus said he was and what was supposed to happen and what he values? Is the person who's saying this loving toward their brothers and sisters? And is the person who's making such a claim obedient to the things that Jesus said? And if yes to two, but not all three, then that person is a fraud. And Christians, in the vein of the disciples here, are to ignore such a person and not treat them as a leader who is from God, and not treat them especially as the Christ. Well, Jesus' prediction turns out to be super, super accurate. And it's super accurate, like super immediately. There had been a handful of messiahs or rival claimants to the title of Messiah who had come before Jesus. And I did a video last summer. I don't remember what I called it now. It's on the YouTube channel. It's like rival claimants or failed messiahs from the time of Jesus. I think that's what I called it. And I go through and do a pretty thorough breakdown with primary sources and stuff like that about the people who were failed messiahs who came before Jesus, most notably Simon of Perea, Thronges, Judas the Galilean, and I think I went on to touch on some that came after the time of Christ, but that's what I want to talk about here in a little more detail. Just a couple of years after the execution and resurrection of Jesus, there's this character who we learn about from Josephus, who's simply called the Samaritan prophet. And we know about him because an incident involving this guy is one of the things that leads to the unraveling of Pontius Pilate's time as governor over Judea. And Pilate is sick of all of the unruliness of the Jewish people and these stupid messiahs and all these, like, I don't even know what you people are into. I wash my hands of all of this. What is truth? Even in the biblical account, we can tell Pilate is exhausted. And along comes this Samaritan prophet. You'll recall the Samaritans, like the woman at the well in John chapter 4. These are a group of like sort of Jewish people who have some other ethnic heritage. There's some stuff that dates back to the divided kingdom and what is true following of God and fake following of God. The Samaritan tradition continues to exist all the way to this day, by the way. But the Samaritan prophet is like, we got to go to Mount Gerizim. That's our holy mountain, and we got to go up there. And God has told me that there's like some treasures or something buried up there that we got to go get. And so the Samaritan prophet rallies a bunch of people to his side and goes up the mountain, and Pilate's like, no, I'm just done. And he sends some troops, and he's like, probably don't kill him. Like, it'd be best if you didn't. That hasn't gone best in the past. But then the soldiers get there and, they're just following orders and things got a little bit crazy. And so they got to knock some heads and kill some people. And they do. And it's a big, giant, bloody mess. And at this point, some peers in government with Pilate are like, I'm sorry, dude, we got to rat you out. You got to go. This isn't working out and we're going to have to replace you. And shortly after that, it's the end of Pilate. But then you've got some other characters, maybe another Theodos who comes along, the Egyptian prophet who I think gets alluded to very, very briefly in Acts, a guy named Menachem, who is maybe the grandchild of Judas the Galilean, who's one of the rebels who came before Jesus was born, and maybe right around the time Jesus was born. And then, of course, most famously, there is Bar Kokhba, who in the 130s leads another gigantic rebellion against the Romans. And he famously goes and hides in all of the cliffs along the Dead Sea, where the Dead Sea Scrolls are being found even to this day. And his revolt goes for a long time, but it ends really ugly, really bloody, with the defeated Jewish people engaging in more mass suicide in the face of the approaching Romans. And it's that Bar Kokhba revolt, which had strong messianic overtones, that ultimately prompts the Home Office back in Rome to be like, we can't do any more of this. We're stripping you of all kinds of privileges and titles and elements of self-rule, and now you are going to feel the much heavier weight of the boot of Rome upon you. And so it's pretty remarkable if you just go and look at the end of Herod the Great's life a few years before Jesus was born, all the way up to like the mid 100s AD. It's like every couple of years, there's a new claimant to the title of Messiah. And as I argue in the little video that I made whenever it was last summer, I think there just must have been mass Messiah fatigue after a while. And Jesus looks pretty vindicated in this regard, looking back after all of those false messianic claims, because they're all destructive. They all bring about death and bloodshed and horrible things. And then here in just a couple of chapters, where Jesus could have tried to rally his troops and go swinging swords and murdering people and taking it all by force, he doesn't. Instead, he willingly submits to death, even a shameful death on a cross. And there isn't this giant military upheaval that would bastardize the entire point of what he's trying to do. So the proof is in the pudding. The contrast between the fake messianic claimants who Jesus is saying to keep an eye out for here and Jesus himself is a very robust contrast, and Jesus stands out as being singular and unique. I like that we call this thing the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. I like that we shoot for 10 minutes of content, but sometimes, like today, I'm like, I just want to keep going because it's all one big interesting thought, but it's not how we do things. So we're going to hit pause there, and we will continue to look at Jesus' answer to the question that the disciples asked, which is, what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And so far, we have one part of the answer, which is that a whole bunch of people are going to come along and claim to be Jesus or claim to be the Messiah, and they ain't going to be the real deal. More tomorrow. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.